Iauetesa. Iram di ira hanaina ora la aima irga ira enem eg ailista waika. My name is Bins, and I welcome you to what I hope you'll find another fun to watch and interesting video in the ILIS tutorial series. This video will be another throwback video where we'll shine a new and brighter light on a topic we've seen 20 videos ago. In video 6, we spoke about the axes of time and space. We'll elaborate on this topic by combining it with another video in our series, which is video number 13, where we spoke about the characteristic and referent particles. More specifically, today, we'll highlight particular parts of each video, and we'll see what happens when those two meet each other. For video 6, this is the so-called axis of depth, which was the third spatial axis. And for video 13, we'll disregard the characteristic marker and pick out only the referent. I'd advise rewatching those two particular videos if you're hazy on the topics in question. So, back in video 6, I drew out a nice stick figure to point out how ILIS's third spatial axis, which is the axis of depth, works exactly. Let me recap. To use the words on the z-axis properly, you need to envision that you're standing on a road or a path. You have traveled on this path in a straight line since the point of departure, and you are roughly halfway to the finish. Your current position is described with the word an ida era. Things that you haven't passed by yet are described with the word an ida ira. They are in front of you or ahead of you. Further down the road, there is an ida ora. Things described with this word are far away from you. You have a long way to go before you get there. Everything behind you is an ida aira. You have passed by these things not too long ago. All the way back is the word an ida ara. Things you've passed by a long time ago. An ida ara, far behind. These words mean front or back or ahead and behind. When using these words though, we'll usually want to say what they're in front or behind of as well. In other words, we'll usually want to anchor position words like these to a point of reference. Otherwise, they're not very useful to us. In ILIS, we can connect a location word to something else by means of the referent particle vai. For example, we'll use the word front, an ida ira. So an ida ira means front or in front. We add vai, the referent marker, to say what something is in front of. And then we add something else, like for example aite, the gender-neutral first-person singular pronoun. An ida ira vai aite then means in front of me or before me. Nothing too crazy so far, right? Things will get a bit weirder though if we shift the focus away from the first person and connect the reference to something else. What if we say, for example, an ida ira vai ni ak aira as, in front of the girl? It turns out that this means something different in ILIS than it does in English. And this brings us to two related linguistical terms I'd like to discuss with you in the scope of this video. These terms are deixis and the so-called deictic center. Now, my intuition tells me to pronounce this word as deictic, but apparently the correct way to say it is deictic. Deixis is something like a narrative point of reference, and how that point of reference affects the exact meaning of words that are relative in nature. Personal pronouns like him and me, demonstratives like this and that, temporal indications like now and before, spatial indications like above and behind, etc. The deictic center is the point of departure, let's say the anchor point that we need to know the identity of in order to understand what personal pronouns, demonstratives, prepositions, and similar non-absolute words exactly mean. Usually we do this intuitively, even without knowing about the concept of deixis. Let me show you what I mean by setting up an example with two protagonists, a girl and a dog. I apologize for the simplistic illustrations, but I am not much of a graphic artist. I even got these pictures off the internet. Anyway, if we want to describe the position of the dog with regards to the girl, we can say the dog is in front of the girl. We choose in front of because the dog and the girl are facing each other, and in this example, the girl functions as the deictic center to describe the position of the dog. However, if the girl faces the other way, then we need to change the preposition of our sentence. The dog is behind the girl. If we turn both around, the dog is no longer behind the girl, it is in front of the girl again. The mechanism at play is the deictic center, and in languages such as English, it takes into account the position of the girl. If she faces the dog, then we describe the dog as being in front of her. If she cannot see the dog, then we describe the position of the dog as behind the girl. So, if both arguments are facing the same direction but the dog cannot see the girl, then the dog is in front of the girl, and the girl is behind the dog. If they both face the other direction, then the dog is behind the girl, and the girl is in front of the dog. If they face each other, then the dog is in front of the girl, and the girl is also in front of the dog. And if both have their backs turned to each other, then the dog is behind the girl, and the girl is behind the dog. But all of this makes sense, right? Isn't this the way all languages handle this kind of descriptions? Well, I don't know about natural languages, but things in ILIS are different. In ILIS, the deictic center is not the girl nor the dog, but it is the narrator and or observer observing the scene instead. And from your point of view, regardless of the directions the girl and the dog are facing, all four stances have something in common. The dog is always on the right, and the girl is always on the left. Because the deictic center in ILIS is different than it is in English, we therefore wouldn't say that the dog is in front nor behind the girl, but instead that the dog is to the right of the girl. Havak an aida ira vai ni ak aira as. The dog is right of the girl. We describe the position of the dog with an aida ira, which is the ILIS word for right, and we link that position to the girl with the referent particle vai. But here is where it gets real tricky. When speaking about left and right or above and below, we won't run into any translation issues as long as you understand and apply the deictic principle of both languages. After all, an aida ira is the ILIS word for right. But what happens when we want to describe the position of the dog with regards to the girl if you're observing them standing like this? Well, in English, you would say that the dog is to the left of the girl, right? In ILIS, however, both the girl and the dog are located on the z-axis, so you'll need to use one of these 5 words to describe the position of the dog. Can you guess which one? Well, from your point of view, the dog is further away from you than the girl is, and this is why we'll need the word an ida ira to describe the dog's position. Even though I tend to translate the word an ida ira with front or in front, you see that in a situation like this, that translation falls apart completely. The translation ahead works a bit better. Havak an ida ira vai ni ak aira as. The dog is ahead of the girl. From your point of view, that is. And since you are the deictic center in ILIS, also here, it doesn't matter whether the girl and the dog both look right, face each other, both look left, or face away from each other. The position of the dog remains an ida ira compared to the girl, and the girl in turn is described as behind the dog. Again, the fact that an ida ira is often translated as behind is confusing, and it is perhaps better to say that the girl is less ahead of you than the dog is. Keep this principle in mind when reading, writing, hearing, and speaking ILIS. This begs the question though, in these 4 pictures, how does one distinguish the relative positions between the dog and the girl in ILIS then? Well, I think that it's best if we kept that for another video. I think I've rambled on long enough for this one. As always, ya aima hagi ora ar etelo en gai e ira, ha eliana ira hasta ira en ete emas gai is. Tahana orasa.